As you may have noticed, there is no time limit.
Okay, that's fine, just so I know, so that I can try and
appreciate a succinct.
I will be as succinct as I can. I'll try and address the queries and the questions. And thank you, first of all, to all the deputies for your comments. Deputy Boyd-Barrett, Deputy Collins. I meant to mention you last week, Deputy Collins, and I didn't have time at the end to get to your contribution, but just to say thank you for that and to acknowledge it from last week. And Deputy O'Snuddig and Deputy Burton. Just first of all, about the amendments, these were ruled out of order on the basis that they dealt with subject matter which was unconnected to this bill, and that's why they weren't allowed. And also, I think it should be made clear to the House, Ceann Corlett, that the committee itself decided not to go ahead with pre-legislative scrutiny, and I think they came back and let our department know that on the 18th of October. And that's the reason why we're here in the Dáil today. There was no conspiracy in relation to that. Anyway, in any event, this should be a very straightforward bill, rather. It's a simple bill, and it's to increase, subject to the normal estimates and budgetary process, the limit for the cumulative capital expenditure of Screen Ireland from 300 million to 500 million. And it's also important to say that there's an increase of 14% in 2019 to Fís Éireann, which is up to 20.4 million, and there was an increase of funding of 2 million to Screen Ireland this year as well. But I just want to try and touch on some of the points that have come up. In general, there's a 10-year action plan, as we know, for the audiovisual sector, and under this plan there's a steering group which will oversee the 200 million investment in taxpayers' money, and which is targeted at this sector in the National Development Plan, and will also look at funding models and regulatory reforms and other supports and general oversight. Just Deputy Boyd-Barrett and other deputies as well have mentioned training, Deputy Burton, Deputy O'Snuddig, and I think Deputy Collins also. And earlier this year, Screen Ireland set up a subcommittee of its board to oversee training. It also employed a new director of its training division, which is called Screen Skills Ireland. And in the Government's Audiovisual Action Plan, which was published last June, there are a significant number of recommendations and actions to be undertaken in the area of training, including the matching of skills with production growth and partnering with third-level institutions in skills development. But also, the unrest that has been mentioned in the film industry at the moment, I'm acutely aware of that. I welcome any suggestions by any of the deputies in a way that we can remedy it. As we know, there are inter-union rivalry issues there at the moment, which is stymieing any progress. But it's very important that we get to the bottom of these issues, and it doesn't, to my mind, seem seemly to have worker representatives arguing or at loggerheads with each other on these matters. And as some of the deputies are aware, officials of my department are available to meet with and do meet with all stakeholders in the industry about this. And last year at the International Consultants Oldsburg with Nordisti carried out 90 separate consultations and evaluated over 180 data sources and collected data through surveys for their report. There was a number of contributions in relation to Section 481, and as we know, this particular part of the Act excludes broadcasters from applying for the tax relief in their own right, and a broadcaster has to partner with an Irish company in order to qualify for the relief, and a company must also have a record of being in the jurisdiction for 21 months in order to be paid relief. And this, in my mind, isn't an unreasonable provision because it acts to protect the taxpayer. And in order to obtain tax relief under Section 481, each producer company is required to provide proposals to my department on their planned training to fulfil their requirement under Section 481. And the producer company must provide these in their application for the tax relief in advance of the project. And the department can accept the proposals or request changes. And in order to monitor the provision of training, each producer company is required to provide a return to the department on training within 4 months of the completion of the project. And this return must include the trainee name, the training role, the mentor role, the period of training and the amount of compensation paid to the trainee. And the information provided to my department is for the purpose of monitoring compliance with the conditions of the award of tax relief under Section 481, of the Act, and it contains significant personal information as well, which is subject to data protection requirements, and it cannot be universally disseminated. In relation to legal protections for workers in the film industry, it's important to note that employees in every industry and sector, as I said last week, are entitled to all existing legal protections. And as you all know, there is legislation being brought forward by my colleague Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection, which is the Employment Bill 2017, which should improve the security and predictability of working hours for employees on insecure contracts and those working variable hours. And obviously, employment law in general should also have a role to play in terms of existing legal protections, and there are also institutions for reporting abuse of employment for reporting abuse of employment legislation. But I should say that I am satisfied that the industry works in general to a high standard, and my department is working with all partners to ensure that all sectors of the industry comply with their obligations as much as we can. Also, I mentioned the Audiovisual Action Plan, I think, that I launched last June, and there's a steering group to implement that plan. This is a whole-of-government approach to the audiovisual industry. Deputy Burton, you mentioned female representation in the film industry. Screen Ireland is committing to addressing that issue, the issue of gender inequality in Irish filmmaking, and Screen Ireland is doing all it can to work towards achieving the target of 50-50 gender parity by 2020 in creative talent working in screen content. And I know that there's been a significant increase of 62% in applications received with female talent included, and also an 82% increase in funding awards with female talent attached in 2018 when we look at in comparison to 2017 figures. Just on people working in the film industry in general, I know Deputy O'Snuddy and Boyd Barrett and Deputy Burton, and I think Deputy Collins raised it as well. And my department has actually published additional information which is now available on the audiovisual sector on the website in the form of a technical annex to the audiovisual report. And as I mentioned earlier, there was 90 separate consultations, and obviously, you know, we have to make sure that you know, all of that is taken into account. But the promotion of the Irish film industry in general is the responsibility of the Screen Ireland, which is formerly the Irish Film Board. And I think it's fair to say that it has undergone major change and development, both domestically and internationally, in recent years. And it has a vision for a vibrant, creative and sustainable Irish film, television and animation industry with diverse voices and talent and opportunities. And it has a number of A-list international festivals and markets where it promotes Irish film and Irish animation, as well as promoting Ireland as a location for internationally mobile film production. And we have the overall audiovisual action plan, which was launched last June. And the key points of the plan are the Section 4.8 extension, which, as we know, there was also a regional uplift of 5%. There's an increased business skills development, matching of the skills with production growth, and partnering with third-level institutions in skills development. And it's important to say as well that the audiovisual plan was underpinned by an economic assessment of the audiovisual industry by Nordicity and by the consultants. And they said that Ireland's film, television and animation sector could, in a period of 5 years, double employment to over 24,000 full-time jobs and a gross value of nearly 1.4 billion. And I hope that that will happen. The loan facility was mentioned as well, I think, by Deputy Boyd Barrett earlier on, and I think Deputy Burton. The assistance given by the government through its various agencies is usually by way of non-repayable grants, and Screen Ireland is unusual in that it awards grants by way of loans which are repaid if and when the project is successful enough to make a profit. And the repayment of any loan allows Screen Ireland to increase the level of loans given to projects. And this system of support operated by Screen Ireland allows Irish Indigenous film and TV projects to be made which would not otherwise be made. And this means that profit isn't the only consideration in the support of the audiovisual sector. And as is the case with some statutory bodies that receive public funding, a limit was set by statute on such outlay. In this case, where the Irish Film Board Act in 1980 was enacted, and that's why we have to change the limit from 300 million to 500 million. But you all know that. Deputy Boyd Barrett is right that we need good data to evaluate our investment in the audiovisual sector on an ongoing basis, and I mentioned that already, and we're going to look at this in the context of the 10-year audiovisual action plan. I think I discussed broadcasters already. There is a balance to be struck, I think, between, they're not all international. I know some international broadcasters have lobbied to have the broadcaster exclusion dropped, but we'll examine this to see if there is disincentive in that regard. What else is there? The loans, training, yeah. Just in general terms, Deputy Collins, you raised in relation to Screen Ireland and Section 481 that they don't actually have any involvement with Section 481. And Deputy Burton, you raised about the board appointments, and the nomination of the board is subject to the guidelines for the appointment of members to state boards if anyone wants to apply through the PASS system. Deputy Collins raised it as well, and the board of Screen Ireland isn't a representative board, but it is skills-based under the Act, and there are 7 members under the Act, and this should probably be looked at as it probably is a very low number for a board. But Screen Ireland has a robust policy on dealing with conflicts of interest on its board as well, which I think is important to say. But I think that's most of it, Ceann Comhairle covered.